Behind the fireplace wall, they found two small bodies in red pajamas, frozen in place for 10 years. Sarah screamed. The twins were never taken. They were here all along. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. It had snowed like it hadn't in years. Thick, quiet flakes falling in such gentle succession they seemed too soft to belong to a world that could hold grief. The town of Ashton Pines looked dipped in sugar, every rooftop glazed, every tree limb bowed with white. Inside the Morgan house, warmth pulsed like a heartbeat. Yellow light from the windows spilled across the yard, and the fire in the hearth hissed and crackled like it had something to say. Russell Morgan crouched near the hearth, feeding the fire with pine logs that snapped with sudden bursts of resin. His flannel shirt smelled of smoke and cinnamon. Behind him, the twins, Emily and Ethan, darted barefoot across hardwood floors, their laughter ricocheting off walls already dressed in tinsel and old ornaments. Emily, always the leader, was daring Ethan to find where she'd hidden the last candy cane. Ethan, always a step behind her in thought and step ahead in loyalty, giggled and obeyed. Sarah, kneeling by the coffee table, taped ribbons onto packages with practiced grace. Her hands moved quickly, but her mind wandered. Something about the snow outside pulled at her. She glanced up as Emily stopped abruptly by the window, nose pressed to the glass, eyes wide with wonder. "Can we go outside for just 1 minute? I want to catch a snowflake," Emily whispered, as if afraid to disturb the magic. Russell turned, grinning. "Bundle up if you do. It's freezing." But Sarah, already exhausted from weeks of holiday preparation and the pressure of perfect memories, simply nodded. "Just the backyard, not a step further." The back door creaked. The cold punched through the warmth like a breath held too long. The twins disappeared into the dark. 10 minutes passed. Russell poured hot cider into mugs and realized the silence had become too complete. He stepped outside, expecting to see boot prints and laughter rising from a pile of snow angels. But there was nothing. No prints, no giggles, just wind and falling snow, erasing everything as it came down. Panic bloomed fast, violent, disbelieving. He called their names, once, twice, again. Sarah came to the door, eyes questioning, then widening, then breaking. Within the hour, the house filled with people. Police, search dogs, neighbors in parkas with flashlights. But the snow kept falling, covering the ground like guilt covers memory. By dawn, hope had already begun to thin. The backyard became a crime scene. The air, a question no one could answer. And the Morgan home, once full of life, became the place where two children went out into the snow and were never seen again. The house hadn't aged so much as it had mourned. Vines clung to its frame like grief too long unspoken, and the windows looked out with a kind of resigned vacancy, no longer angry, just tired of waiting. When Russell Morgan stepped onto the front porch for the first time in 7 years, his breath turned to frost, and his hands trembled. Not from the cold, but from something older, lodged deep beneath his ribs. Regret, maybe, or something worse. He had buried a bottle, a marriage, and the last shreds of his self-respect in the years since the twins vanished. But the house remained, watching. He'd bought it back in a cash offer that surprised even the realtor. "Why?" she'd asked. "Because I have to know," Russell had replied, and that was the truth. He hadn't come for peace. He'd come to exhume something he could feel but not name. Sarah arrived an hour later. The driveway crunched under her tires the same way it had the night the kids disappeared. She stepped out, older, thinner, her dark hair now streaked with gray, her posture a quiet map of permanent tension. She didn't greet him. She didn't need to. They shared too much silence already. Inside, the house was dry but hollow. Dust curled in corners, and the air still smelled faintly of pine, as if it remembered Christmas and refused to let it go. The living room was just as they'd left it. Walls the color of eggshell, floorboards slightly warped by time and memory. The fireplace sat at the center like a wound that had never closed. Sarah spoke first. It was always cold after that night, no matter how many times I resealed it, no matter how high I turned the heat. It just breathed. Russell stepped closer, ran his hand along the brick. His fingers paused where mortar lines met unnaturally. A ridge, a shift in texture. "I'm taking it apart," he said. He hired Pete Darner, a mason from town who still remembered the twins. Pete was slow, methodical, hands like granite, eyes like someone who knew better than to ask questions. The first day, they peeled back layers of brick, Russell sweating despite the chill. On the second day, Pete paused. "There's something here." The metal panel they uncovered was barely larger than a clipboard, sealed in rust and years of soot. Russell's crowbar found purchase. With a groan of disuse, it gave way. Behind it, an old access shaft, stone-lined, narrow, silent. Cold air surged out, unnatural, hungry. Then came the smell. Thick, earthy, faintly sweet, like something forgotten too long in the dark. Russell didn't speak, neither did Pete. They simply stared, while the hearth that had once warmed his family breathed out the scent of the dead. The flashlight's beam sliced through dust and darkness, jittering against the uneven stone interior. The crawl space had once been part of an old chimney-cleaning passage, long forgotten, sealed behind brick and time. The mason's hand trembled as the light fell upon the first shape. Small, curled, silent. The second lay only inches away, closer than breath, tucked into the curve of the first like they'd fallen asleep mid-whisper. Red flannel, pajamas with little white reindeer. The kind Sarah used to fold warm from the dryer, pressing her face into them before calling the twins for bedtime. Pete dropped the flashlight. Sarah's scream tore through the house like a siren cracking glass. It wasn't just grief. It was recognition. Police swarmed the property within the hour. The house was cordoned off. Forensics swept every inch, their faces tight with practiced neutrality. But even they couldn't hide their expressions when the coroner quietly confirmed it. Dental records, bone structure, fabric aging, Emily and Ethan, their children, gone not into the woods, not into some stranger's car, but here, all along. Inches from the hearth they had danced beside. The cause was determined quickly. Hypothermia, no bruising, no fractures, no signs of struggle. The twins had died not in fear but in stillness. Their bodies huddled together like the last instinct they followed was love. But nothing about it felt simple. The shaft was tight, dark, and hidden behind brick and mortar. It wasn't the kind of place a child stumbled into. There had to be a reason. Enter Dr. Valerie Lindholm, a child psychologist brought in by the local sheriff, who remembered the twins from news reports years earlier. She studied the Morgan home, reviewed hours of old home videos Sarah still kept in a shoebox, watched how Emily would invent entire fantasy worlds and rope Ethan into being the Lost Prince or the Snow Knight. She gave a quiet conclusion. They were playing. The final piece came from a hidden latch behind the bookshelf near the fireplace, a loose hinge barely visible unless you knew to look. The children must have discovered it in one of their games. A secret passage, a hiding spot, the perfect lair for adventure. But once inside, the old airlock panel had snapped closed. From the outside, it looked like just another layer of wall. From the inside, there was no way out. Russell erupted when he learned the shaft had been bricked over just a month before their disappearance. "They sealed it shut without checking the crawl space," he shouted. They didn't even know what they were building over. It was negligence, but accidental, tragic, and irreversible. Then they found it, a piece of brittle paper, wedged between two stones inside the shaft. Drawn in red crayon, two stick figures, smiling. Snowflakes. A brick wall. And next to it, written in a shaky, mirrored scrawl, the word, cold. Sarah wept, as if the message had only just reached her. A final note, from the dark. Not a cry for help, but a child's last description of where they had gone. The revelation rippled through Ashton Pines like a winter wind that cut deeper than the cold ever could. It pierced through fences and kitchen windows, swept over church pews and grocery aisles. People whispered with downcast eyes, voices lowered not out of gossip, but guilt. The whole town seemed to grieve all over again, not just for the loss of 2 children, but for the years spent looking in the wrong places, holding on to the wrong suspicions. Lawsuits followed like shadows, against the renovation company, the building inspector, the prior owners. Legal proceedings crawled on for months, but in the end, nothing would ever feel like justice. Apologies were offered, funds were raised, memorials discussed, but none of it changed the fact that 2 children had died just feet away from where their parents had once stood singing Christmas carols by the fire. Sarah, already a woman held together by thin seams of habit and memory, seemed to unravel again. The finality, so long denied, swept over her like an undertow. Some days, she couldn't rise from bed. Other days, she sat at the window for hours, staring at the backyard as though she still half expected to see them walking through the snow. But Russell, once the man who vanished into bottles and blame, stayed. He poured himself not into silence this time, but into the hearth. Stone by stone, he tore down what had betrayed them. He worked in the cold with bare hands, his fingers splitting and bleeding against rough brick. He didn't rush. He didn't curse. He just worked, steady and reverent, not to forget, but to reshape, to reclaim. When the new fireplace stood finished, its mortar still damp with memory, he placed something inside the mantel. A plaque, sealed into the heart of the structure. Brass, polished until it glowed. The inscription was simple. In loving memory of Emily and Ethan, may this flame always keep them warm. On Christmas Eve, 10 years to the hour after the snow swallowed them, Russell and Sarah lit the hearth together. They said no words. None were needed. The fire caught slowly, then leapt, casting golden light across the room like warmth reaching back through time. Outside, snow fell soundlessly, but inside, the house breathed again. They sat side by side, the air still but no longer cold. Sarah, eyes glistening, murmured, "They were never far. We just couldn't see." Russell nodded, his gaze locked in the flames. Now they can finally come home. The house no longer kept secrets, only memory, and a fire that would never go out again.